Hi there, my name is Chelsea Thompto. I am an artist in residence for the winter session of Laboratory Residency's digital residency. Uh, Today I'm going to be showing you my studio, and in addition to showing you my studio, I'm going to talk a little bit about my project and show you some of the ways in which I am thinking about facial recognition and code in an interactive sense. So I'm from, well, not from, I recently actually moved to California, the Bay Area. So the studio that you see here, which doubles as an office and a guest bedroom, is in sunny downtown San Jose. So I'll give you a little bit of a tour. It's very, very short. There's outside, my room, and of course, very important studio assistant, my cat Mackerel. So the project that I'm going to be working on for laboratory residency is a project that involves facial recognition and creating a website wherein people can explore the ideas of facial recognition through text and interactive web pages. So the core of this project is to really get people both fascinated and in some ways a little bit creeped out or worried about facial recognition. So the goal of this project is to leverage that technology in order to start to question that technology and who it works for and who it doesn't work for. So what I'd like to do today is I'm going to show you some of the ways in which I've been experimenting with facial recognition. This includes the API I'm using to create live web pages with facial recognition, and it also includes some commercial products that use facial recognition in different gimmicky sort of ways. The starting of that is actually the Snapchat filter program called Snap Camera. So Snap Camera is basically Snapchat filters for your computer so that you can add them to, say, your Zoom calls and those sorts of things. So here you can see a spider crawling across my face. You can turn yourself into an anime person. There's all sorts of different things that you can do with this software. What I'm interested in is how to take this software and use it to interrupt other facial recognition software. So in a second here, I'm going to switch over to my screen share. Just give me a moment here. All right, so what we see on the screen here is multiple displays. So in the bottom corner, of course, you have my image. That is the image that's coming directly from Snapchat. And then what we have on the left-hand side here is Chanel's makeup try-on. And then what we have on the right is a current version of the code that I'm working on for my website. And so one of the things I'm interested in is how these technologies rely on the way your face is positioned for the camera and how deviating from that position can really start to do odd things. So if we go back to the spider, for example, we can see that with the Chanel example here, it very, very quickly starts to disrupt the illusion that Chanel wants us to have in their makeup try-on. On the other side of the screen, it's a little bit harder to see, but it's also interrupting that facial recognition process that's happening here. So why am I interested in this? I'm interested in this because basically when we are faced with these technologies, a lot of times we have these really fun, kind of gimmicky ways in which the technology is introduced to us. Here we can see a cat on my head. But that often helps to obscure some of the problematic things that happen with this technology. So if we switch over here to this demonstration. Here we can see a more serious version of facial recognition. You can see that on the side here it is guessing my gender, it's guessing my age, and it's guessing my emotions. And this is all happening in real time online. And so while something like this is really fun and really kind of odd and weird and dystopian, especially when it fails, this really starts to get more serious, and we can start to see the implications of what happens when these things don't work out quite the way that we think they're supposed to. And so if we go back and again add the spider, we can see how something as fun and simple as a Snapchat filter might have some potential to actually disrupt this facial recognition. So one of the real core questions that I have as an artist and just as a person is to think about, like, what are really the ramifications of a computer deciding whether I'm male or female, deciding that I'm 25 years old, and deciding what my emotions are. When we think about this, we could think about it in relationship to things like anti-trans bathroom bills, wherein there are certain states that are trying to make it so that whatever they determine to be, quote unquote, your sex at birth is the only bathroom that you can go to in public space. So if you were to combine facial recognition with a law like that, we could start to see how maybe there is a potential future wherein there would be a camera that could identify, quote unquote, identify whether someone is male or female, and set some sort of alarm if in fact they went into the restroom that they felt they wanted to go into. So for me as a trans person myself, I'm really interested in this technology and the ways it may actually end up being used against me. As we can see as I'm talking here, right, this vacillates. I'm now 21, whereas before I was 35. Sometimes I'm male on here, sometimes I'm female. So when we're thinking about these things and we think about the gimmicks, that can be really like fun and engaging and fascinating, but there is this sort of very real edge to it. And that edge and kind of pushing that balance between what is real, what is fun, and what isn't is what I'm really, really interested in with this technology and with my project here. So the goal is to both fascinate while also challenging viewers to think about how these things are working and how they're operating in real space. So why am I male and 23 here, but then when I move forward I'm female, right? Like what's operating, what's happening under the hood? And so what these sorts of studio explorations are, fun things like this here, what they really do is they serve as a way for me to start thinking about these things, to start thinking about how these things are functioning and think about ways to visualize how they're functioning in the real world and to make visually interesting artworks about them. So I'm going to switch over here to the face API.js. So this is the actual software, the library that I'm using, the JavaScript library that I'm using currently to create examples like what we see on the right-hand side of the screen here. So this is their documentation playground where you can kind of look around and see the different ways in which this functions. You can change things around. So my project throughout the next couple months here at Laboratory will rely heavily on this library to explore the ways in which facial recognition fails to actually do the things that we think it's doing. So how do I get from here, what we see on the left-hand side of the screen, to what we are seeing on the right-hand side of the screen? So what's happening on the right-hand side of the screen right now is that there is a locally running version of this face API.js that allows me to make changes and experiment with this code in real time. And so we see these little binding boxes here. That's part of my debugging, so it's the way in which I'm able to see how the code is responding. And so what this whole thing here is built of is really two things. It's an HTML page and it is a JavaScript script, which we can see here. I'm not going to go through everything that's happening with this right now, but the main thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to change it so that we can see the actual image that's going on underneath here. So that's actually changed over in the HTML side. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. So now, it's going to take a second for it to start. We can see that I can get the video underneath, so we can see how that tracking is working in real time. So what this is about is I'm thinking about this idea of actually using the facial recognition as a way to create a mask, right? So this thing that is actually meant to make us more knowable. I'm interested in what happens when that same thing actually obfuscates or makes it impossible for us to be seen. So what's happening on the left-hand side of the screen, or rather the Facial Recognition Studio Experiments side of the screen, is that the code is not refreshing or clearing out those readings every time, so that they accumulate, they build up, and they actually create a mask over my face, and then they periodically wipe out and start again. And so I'm interested in how we can use those things to create both a visually interesting effect and also create something that actually makes it harder to see, just the way doing things like looking at the spider make it harder to see. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly switch this. So this is a more standard version. So this is like that same piece of software, except refreshing every time. So we can see how much more similar it is now to what's happening on the other side. But the goal of these experiments is to create visuals that will then live on top of and underneath texts and essays that I am writing and calling from other sources to create a final website. So I'm going to see if I can't show you this here. Go back to a more low-tech thing. So this is a very, very rough little sketch of what it is I'm actually thinking about doing for the residency, which is basically, you can see on the left-hand side, I've got this sketch of a website which will have static text that you can scroll up and down, and that there will be these live wireframe versions of faces that stay even as you scroll the text, and that some of the text will actually be generated from the scripts running in the background. So the goal here is to create both a visual and textual experience that will allow viewers both the opportunity to be able to visually explore facial recognition and also think about it in this more textual way, to think about the more procedural understandings of this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show a couple more examples of where I'm at with this current version. So I'm going to go ahead and show some of the code. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm going in and I'm creating a bunch of little sketches, little scripts that allow me to really, really quickly see the different ways in which I can make this, this whole thing function. So I'm able to go ahead and just change out the script in my HTML and then refresh my page, all of this being hosted on my computer. And then the newest version will show up and populate, allowing me to really, really quickly respond. And I see this really as kind of like a drawing practice, right? So how can you draw with code, or how can you make the computer do a drawing for you? So the only difference between this one and the last one is that this one doesn't refresh, right? So now we see this accumulation building up, and it's never going to stop. It's going to just keep building up over time. and how does that change, and how might that change a viewer's understanding or thinking about facial recognition as compared to something like this again, where the facial recognition is very, very tight. And then how something like the spider example is very, very apparent. Its impact is very apparent on this version, but on the other version of it, it becomes very, very difficult to see those differences and to see the ways in which those things are impacted. So I'm just going to go ahead and for the next couple minutes, I'm just going to do a couple experiments here, show a couple things. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can see the chat right now. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Oh, that is a great question. So one question is, will the faces on the background be viewers or someone else's? So one of the things that I'm interested in is allowing people the opportunity to explore this without necessarily having to expose their own face to facial recognition. So when viewers will first come to the site, they'll have the option to have their webcam activated and have this actually be their face in real time. But I also want a version that runs off of stock footage so that it's pre-generated so that they can still get the visual effect without necessarily having to actually give someone access, right? So that's actually a really nice segue, because it's a very core part of what I'm interested in here is, how do we explore the violences of this technology without necessarily reproducing them. So I want to invite people to have that experience, but there's also definitely going to be a very clear way to have an experience of it without necessarily needing to, if you're uncomfortable subjecting your face to this sort of strange situation. So that's a great question. Well, if there aren't more questions, the thing I wanted to end on, I'll end with kind of this chaotic mishmash of things happening on the screen here, was I did want to talk just a little bit about some of the inspirations that I have for this work. And so one of the books that I'm currently reading is, let's see if I can get it up here, Glitch Feminism. It's a new book by Legacy Russell. I'm really, really excited. A lot of what this project does is to think about the idea of the glitch as a way to interrupt or challenge, as a moment of opportunity for us to like think about glitch not as this negative thing, but rather as this like really revolutionary or revelatory opportunity to sort of disrupt technologies and ideas and ways of thinking. So that's something that I've been really excited about. As well as Jorge Luis Borges' Ficciones. This is a very old book, but it's near and dear to my heart. It's all about thinking through structures and systems of knowledge and systems of knowing through literary fiction. So I'm really trying to pull sources from very, very contemporary, but also thinking about these other things that inspire my work and inspire my thinking about technology, even if it's not necessarily directly related to technology. And then the final thing that I'll mention is just thinking through the idea of science fiction and fantasy as a way to think about futures and a way to think about using technology to actually create a more equitable future, which is not necessarily what technology, especially technologies developed by these larger tech companies, want to do. So how can we take and use glitch for the purposes of interrupting some of the more violent ways that these things are happening, and start to think about how we might use the quote-unquote malfunctions of this software as actually a way to imagine like a better, more equitable future. So I can stick around for a couple minutes to answer any other questions, but otherwise I'm going to wrap it up here in just a few minutes. All right, well, thanks everyone so much for coming and taking a look. I will be back in the coming weeks with more live coding and more progress on this project, hopefully with more visuals to show you and also some text. So have a great day.